All right, I'm gonna start letting people in, but I will only start actually talking at 3 o'clock. Welcome, everyone. We'll give everyone about a minute to start. Just let a few more people trickle in. All right, it is now 3 o'clock. Welcome, everyone. Bienvenue à tous. My name is Nathalie Joannette, and I'm the Pro Coach Coordinator here at the Coaching Association of Canada. Thank you so much for joining us today for this session. I wanted to start with a land acknowledgement. From coast to coast, we respect and acknowledge the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples of Canada as the keepers of the territory upon which we'll be learning today. And I'm honored to be joining you from the Algonquin territory. Just a few housekeeping notes before we begin. The session is being recorded today, so feel free to leave your cameras on or off, whichever one you prefer. And it is also being presented with simultaneous interpretation. In order to listen with the language of your choice, just click the interpretation button and you'll be able to select between French and English. We'll also have time at the end of the session today for some questions, so feel free to pop them in the chat throughout the session. And now to introduce our guest speaker for today, we have Sean Bell, who is the Vice President at the Canadian Insurance Brokers, CIBI, which is the insurance used for our professional coaches and their benefits. And with that, I'll pass the mic to Sean.
Okay, thank you very, very much. And thanks again to the association for having us here. It's our pleasure to participate. And thanks very much for all of those who are attending. And I do hope and I trust you'll have some takeaways from this webinar. As the intro preceded, my name is Sean Bell. I'm a Senior Vice President and a Principal at Canadian Insurance Brokers. We are located in Toronto, Ontario, but we are operating all across the country. A little bit about my firm. Well, we're here in this position as the administrators of the coaches insurance benefit program put on by the association for your benefit. Although we are truly a full service risk management and insurance brokerage specializing in the commercial insurance world. We do a little home and auto, personal lines. My realm of expertise, as this program indicates, is the sport and adventure and leisure world of risk. But I do parlay that into a lot of risk where, the common element and product are the vulnerable. So whether this is sports organizations, education institutes, this is what I do with the vulnerable, mainly the youth or seniors as the product. As the title indicates, we're going to discuss some risk management as it pertains to coaches. And get into the benefit of the actual program, and I'm trusting you'll take a little bit away. I'm not sure who's on this call, whether some of you are already signed up, or if even better yet, everyone participating is new and doesn't know much about this. I hope you get a little bit more out of this. When I say risk management, it's a very broad category, and we're not going to be here, and maybe that's a good takeaway for another webinar, but we're going to look at the end of risk management here. We're dealing with not the preventative side of risk, but more the reactionary side of risk. So any risk management plan, you're going to prevent risk and you do your best to mitigate it and to eliminate it, but you can't eliminate it. The risk curve will never hit zero. And then what do we do about that gap? And insurance comes in, as well as some other takeaways we hope that you get from this. New slide. Okay, so just on the agenda, just want to summarize the key points that I'll try to get across. And what is insurance? For those of you who don't know, then you'll hopefully hear and you'll get to know a little bit more about what this product provides to you in terms of your a solution to your risk management program. So why do coaches need to purchase insurance? That's part of the risk manage. We will delve into the world of waivers. I would trust that most are practicing these already. But there are, just having someone sign a document that doesn't, say everything. And we're going to get into a little bit about the nitty gritty of an effective waiver program, which, will not remove liability. It will just be a good tool if you do have a bad day. We'll go into an overview of the insurance program that's put on by the association and what's part of what are the key highlights and coverages. There's a base policy that everybody who registers has access to. When you reach out to our office, we will discuss optional add-ons that, depending on who you are and the sport, your circumstances, these can be very, very, very important. I don't want to say as or more than the base standard package, but there's certainly a lot of good coverage that I just don't want anyone to just overlook. I'll get a little more of in with respect to the optional coverages. I'll dive a little harder into one of them, and this is a legal expense insurance. Now, you might be asking, well, what is all insurance legal expense? You're right, it is. It's all a form of defense cost. So, the policy provides minimally and base a third-party coverage for yourselves. So if a third party were to come after you, well, what if you had a legal issue and you needed some advice and more of an offensive legal situation? Well, that's not covered under a typical insurance policy. So we do have this add-on, and we'll try to go as much into that as possible. We're going to leave some time at the end for some Q&A questions. Happy to it, but I'm all for an interactive webinar here. Feel free to put up your hand. Sometimes it's better to ask that question through the topic versus to the end. It may lose its relevance. So please, put up your hand, and I think the team will be monitoring, and we can interrupt and deal with those. Next slide, please. So I asked these two questions a lot, and mainly when I started, almost 30 years ago, these were more live, webinar seminars, and I'd always love to ask, like, who here likes the insurance? I'm not asking you to respond; it's tough. And also, in addition, who here likes to buy insurance? Well, 25 years ago, you would get nobody putting up their hand or agreeing, and it's remarkable to see, and I think that's a testament to everyone understanding, or whether it's a good or bad, but realizing the risks are real. And the amount of hands that go up and people who agree with the liking of insurance has definitely increased over the years. So anyway, let's carry on. Next slide. Okay, so as I said, we're dealing with risk management here. We're dealing with the end of the risk curve here. How do we, fill that gap? Because we can never, get rid of risk. So insurance, what is insurance? Well, it's a mechanism of risk transfer. In my opinion, it's truly the best and one of the only ways to transfer risk. You pay a premium, and that risk gets transferred to an insurance company to sort of step into your shoes should you deal with a legal nightmare, should you have a bad day. You can do everything you can. However, it's not always going to be good enough. Insurance, it's an essential aspect of the risk management plan. as is the next couple slides after this. People who you do not have to sign legal contracts, but just by the virtue of where you are, the laws of the land, you assume liabilities, responsibilities that you may or may not know. And so you have a duty of care. You have contractual exclusions and waivers and releases of liability. And you need to understand that. And it's not just a matter of signing a legal contract. You effectively have, under our tort and civil law system in this country, liabilities that you need to insure against. Next slide, please. So why you need to purchase insurance? Now, like a lot of, first commercial insurance purchasers, they, your first dive into buying insurance is because you become legally obligated. It's a legal requirement through a contract. A governing body, an association, an owner of a facility will not give you access. So like 99% of the first purchasers out there, this is really when you need it. Now, even if you do not have a contractual obligation to buy insurance, it's strongly recommended you get this. And there'll be a few slides throughout that will we'll explain that even if you have coverage you feel under an association, there is some benefit to purchasing your own individual benefit here. Next slide. So part of the reactionary side of risk management, again, the preventative side, we're not going to dive here into. That's maybe another very good takeaway webinar we can discuss, but we're looking at how do you really act on that small amount of risk that you can never eliminate, and what are waivers? I'm assuming most people are initiating these. We're going to give you a little bit of, without, we're not lawyers. This is a legal conversation. Insurance always follows the legal conversation. So, we need to discuss it a little bit. Waivers, we can give advice on, we can provide ones if you don't have one, but ultimately it is a conversation for a lawyer. But having one, particularly if you have insurance coverage, that your insurer is aware of the one you're using and has agreed that it is acceptable. So as an occupier, you are permitted now in the laws of the country to exclude the duty of care and the liability arising from a breach of that duty via contractual waiver. When I started about 25 years ago, a waiver wasn't worth the paper it was signed on. That quickly changed in the early 2000s. There was a precedented case involving a zipline operation in the West Coast, where waivers were executed, and they were executed by two legal students, lawyer students, females, who ended up colliding mid-zipline and suing the organization. That court case went through the courts, and the judge ultimately said, well, you are smart, intelligent humans, and you signed this, and this was the inherent risk of the activity you decided to do. So we've really seen a real, legal, they really are standing up legally now. They do not remove liability. They are just a really good safe net if you do have liability. So you can still be sued. You can still go to trial. The judges are just looking at these being executed with some of these criteria we'll go into. So an occupier of a premises can restrict and modify and exclude the duty of care, provided that they take reasonable steps to bring such restriction, modification, or exclusion to the attention of the person to whom the duty is owed. You can see multiple forms of waivers: signed, executed waivers, ticket waivers, and signage waivers. And there really is a three-part test for the waivers: that they be predominantly presented to the attention of the signatory, have a scope of release worded to cover the conduct of the defendant, and be reasonably enforceable and unconscionable. Next slide, please. just a little bit of a graphic, and you don't want your athletes, a potential plaintiff, to state these points. I didn't read it, I didn't see it, and even if I did, I didn't understand it. If they can prove those, there's not much legal, point of the waiver. I think this slide's important in today's age based on digital signatures. I don't have slides on these case laws, and that's my apology. I will add those down the line. But with everyone signing online, which is legally allowed, waivers are generally being sent digitally and signed digitally. Well, then it's more important that you think of these 3 points, because that just provides more defense for the plaintiff to argue that, well, they sent me 4 million links and it was one of them. There's a case that has gone through the courts, and it involved a 24/7 trampoline gym. And the participants signed the waiver when I believe they registered to become a member, and then they had 24/7 access to this facility that was not attended by anybody. Well, the courts ruled that that wasn't enough, and that the waiver was signed, but it certainly wasn't enough to have the case thrown out. And they did favor in the plaintiff's position that the injuries they sustained, although they signed a waiver, they were holding the facility liable for damages. So if you are using digital signatures, then don't make that your only time and place that this is addressed. If it goes out initially digitally, there should be a time and a place and a conversation about that waiver signed. What I believe the judge stated in the trampoline scenario was that there was no signage. Like we got to the facility, they could have easily have just put a poster up of the waiver language, and it would have made it done a whole lot more for the sake of that facility. New paragraph, please.
Sean, we have a couple comments and questions.
Oh, yeah. Please interrupt if they come in anytime. Go ahead. Do you want to back the slide up? Is it relevant to the other slide? Or okay, go ahead.
Yes. So the first comment was that would be like use facility at your own risk type of signage.
Well, we'll get into that a little bit more, but exactly what and in a couple of slides, there's going to be some bulletproof points that your waivers need to have. And while we're talking about it, and it's a really good, important question, when you read, when I discuss this slide and the next slides about what makes a rock hard waiver, I think some people will, what will come to mind is a ski hill. A ski hill has well been known to have, and ski resorts have the best waivers around. Okay, you sign to buy your ticket, you get your lift ticket. So you've signed and executed a waiver. That signed and executed waiver will have many of the conditions on the next couple slides present. Then the ticket goes on your wares. The back of that ticket has the waiver language that you signed. And if you then get on a chairlift, there's a billboard with the same language. So Natalie, what was the question exactly again? Bottom line is that the way, is it the question about the waiver or putting up signage? Sorry.
If the participant wants to unmute just to clarify. If
Sure,
not,
it was.
Okay, perfect.
Sorry, it was just about, you had mentioned the specific language to use, and so that was an example that I was thinking about.
Yeah, and you'll see some specific language and formatting of what makes a good waiver. I guess that yeah. So that answers the question. If it doesn't, if the next few slides don't answer, please just pipe up again. Any other? There's more questions.
Just one more comment. It just says, it would be great to know about waivers for virtual training sessions that we are offering. Is it enough to just have a document that they need to read and then click a box in our online forms?
I would say not. It's not enough. First of all, on online training, I'm assuming you are monitoring it, and that's also important. If you have sent the waiver out digitally ahead of time, I would start your online training with another brief comment that you remember you signed it. Whether you put a slide up before which has the waiver again, everyone signed this. Again, back to that couple slides ago, you don't want the plaintiff to say they didn't see it, they didn't understand it. And the more time and places that this is evident, then it's only going to help. Okay. So I think this is going to help answer some of the questions on what makes a really rock hard legal waiver, and making sure that the plaintiff does view it and does understand it, right? Because if you're sending them out digitally and having them sign it, there's so much room for subjective argument that, they didn't understand it. No one explained it. And it was messed in with about 400 forms. So, using bold, capitalized, and highlighted language is very, very key. And when I'm reading these and when we're reviewing these, think about the ski hill for those skiers, right? It's bold, different capitalizations, different fonts, different colors. Initialing boxes. It just can't be a signature at the bottom. Every clause, without the release of liability, what's the inherent risks? And specifically say those inherent risks. One inherent, if you're taking a waiver from my office, adding two specific examples of risk based on your activities is very, very important. And so using initials throughout the waiver, not just one final signature and date, make a waiver a mandatory part of online registration. But again, making sure there's another time and support the waiver with signage. I've discussed that. Clear identification of the document and the intent. There has to be a clause about the assumption of risk, a clause about the release of waiver and indemnity. A jurisdiction clause is important. And again, I'm not a lawyer. Insurance follows the law. I do deal with a lot of the law. But I don't believe it can be worldwide. I think it has to be a little more a smaller jurisdiction, or at least say worldwide, but just make sure that the jurisdiction is. And a signed and witness acknowledgement, that's also key. It just helps, them not argue. If a witness is also signing it, then there's less there's less room for subjectivity. Scope of waivers, and waiver wrinkles. So, you miss some of these points. They can minimize the effect of these waivers. They can wrinkle them. I keep going back to the ski lift, ski hills. Those do stand up all the time. And it's hard to argue you saw it, but if you miss some of these major points, some bolds, not highlighted enough, not initialed enough clauses, these can create winkle waivers, and they may not, hold up. Now, I don't want to get you scared if the waiver doesn't hold up because of some sort of, something was missed. That's why you have insurance. Your insurance is not going to be nullified and void if you've made a mistake. That's a negligent act that you've committed, and that's what needs to be proven for insurance. So, we're just trying to, you have insurance. You may have a bad day. The waiver is only going to do more to help minimize your liability. So your insurer will probably pay out a lot less effectively. They may only have defense costs. And because you had a good rock hard waiver program, there was no damages. And whatever the insurance is out of pocket is really just to defend you through this. With respect to waiver, as I said, 25 years ago, waivers were not worth the paper they were on. They quickly changed. We're starting to see, though, wrinkles occur in the different ways provinces are looking at them. Again, I don't have slides. There's a couple case laws that are important, one in Ontario and one in British Columbia, on how the courts are looking at inherent risks of an activity with signed waivers. And so in the BC, it involved a soccer game in North Vancouver. And it involved the athlete. Someone tackled them, and broke their legs. This is the case. If you care, is Miller versus Cox, and a recreational soccer player was liable for more than $100,000 for the dangers of recklessness of a slide tackle. Okay, so in the end, the waivers were signed, but the courts still assumed liability based on a reckless behavior. The Ontario courts, in a case called Liability and Crew, the Ontario Supreme Court found that a hockey player was not liable for a body check from behind, which caused the plaintiff to break bones in the legs. The court found that the defendant had acted clearly, over-aggressively, but did not act maliciously or out of the ordinary and beyond the bounds of fair and expected play. So the practical results in the view of the province means quite simply that an insured hockey player in British Columbia faces a much less substantial burden of proof of an actionable injury than does a similar player in the provinces. So it's just interesting. I mean, I guess, Ontario, it's a little bit of a higher bar than in BC. The courts are not going to seem very, very sympathetic to someone who, and I should also point, both of these cases involve someone maliciously trying to hurt somebody effectively. Both were known to do it, and it just seems that the court's looking a little less sensitive on the Ontario side. Next slide, please. Okay, so just a little bit about, well, I talked about the firm, but the insurance program we offer on behalf of the association commenced back in 2016. In fact, the association did approach my office. There was no real, in the box, one size fits all insurance program for professional coaches. That's where the conversation started. Many of them were, not working on behalf of the associations, therefore didn't have a policy to follow them. So this was the intent of the association and my office to develop that. And over time, it's growing. We're here almost 10 years later, unbelievable. And although it was quite a hiccup through COVID, where it went to almost zero, we've certainly gotten back on and seeing good success. Again, it fills the gap, right? When you don't have a policy following you. That's not to say that this is not relevant or important or something you want to consider if you are only working for an association, because there's coverages in this, and you'll see that can set contingent or excess to what the coaching is, or what your association policy. There's a lot more coverage in this that you wouldn't have working on an association. So, you could access it for insurable events that even if you are working under an association. Next slide. So again, it was originally created for the professional coaches, and then soon after launch, the association, wanted it opened up to all levels of coaching, whether that's NCCP coach, registered chartered, and coaching developers. If anyone's on here, you're the coach of the coach. So this coverage, you have access to this. The program will cover your any volunteers. The program will not cover anyone paid on your behalf. They would need their own, assuming they are qualified coaches, their own insurance program. They can purchase as long as they're in good member and good standing and have an NCCP number. We do have a lot of scenarios where a coach has a policy with us, and then they grow into a far more robust professional coaching operation with hired employees. They have more of a commercial risk, and some of, depending on your sport, they modify equipment and have a proprietary piece of equipment relevant to the sport they coach. These are not meant the intent of this program, and if that's the case, that's fine. We can accommodate that, but some of those would kick you out, and we would have to put you more on a more annual commercial insurance policy for the sport you coach. Next slide.
We have another question in the chat.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Curious about your thoughts on informed consent and assumption of risk agreements as opposed to waivers.
Well, I mean, there's sort of overlap there, right? So there is that is part of a waiver. There is, I can't give the legal definitions or but they effectively are part of a waiver. So they need to have a waiver needs to have those elements, if that helps. And they should have, and the insurers are going to want to see those. So yeah, it's applied consent. And that's effectively what's going into the waiver, and it needs to be a clause that is initialed under the waiver. So coverage under the program, I mean, the anchor of it is general liability, right? And for those that don't know, general liability is third-party coverage if you are sued for third-party bodily injury or property damage. So someone alleges that you injured them, or your negligence caused their injury or their damage to their property, and they come after you with a civil claim. Very unique coverage that has been with the program day one is professional liability. Now, you're starting to see professional liability added to a lot of sport programs, insurance programs now. That wasn't always the case. We've had this day one, and there's a gray area between professional and general, and just the professional, if the judge deems you're negligent as the result of your professional duty, then that may not be covered under a general liability. So you don't ever want to have that gray area in a court case. So therefore, you have the professional liability. Generally, it involves a financial loss of the third party. So general is bodily injury, property damage. Professional is more of a financial loss, breaching your your professional duties as a coach. Certainly, the description of professional duty is expanding for coaches, and specifically certain coaches. The definition of the professional services is broadening out beyond just what's inherent of the sport that they coach. So, there's a conversation where, some coaches are involved in, something a little unrelated to coaching, and that may not necessarily be picked up. So it's important that you define what your professional services you're offering are. And if it's beyond what's normal of a coach, then you may want to ask the question. And it's not unlike that there is potential a need for a specific professional policy for you, depending on what you're doing. So that's the anchor of the policy. The wording is very broad to include incidental medical malpractice, and as a base, also part of the base policy, there's a medical benefit, a sport accident medical benefit, which you don't really get very often unless it's purchased. Associations don't purchase it, so we like the sport accident cover. It's very good benefit to you if you are injured. I'll get a little more into what it is. And it's generally, that's a good coverage where if you're working on an association, you might have general and professional. You most likely don't have sport accident. And if you buy this policy, it's almost a little bit of a medical benefit for you. The optional coverages that we can look to add are the abuse liability. Should you be, if you have a duty of care with respect to the vulnerable sector, the minors, then this is something you really need to consider buying up with. Legal expense, I'm going to get a little more into that. And equipment, that's property coverage. And then certainly understood coaches don't have a very significant, across the board, a significant equipment exposure. Some sports are definitely more equipment extensive. So that's something we can add on if you have valuable equipment part of your sport. This is a territorial policy, worldwide policy. You can operate around the world, but if the claim occurs worldwide, the suit must be brought against you in Canada. And that's not unlike a lot of coverages in the world. You have coverage to respond to events worldwide. Should you be traveling and you have a bad day, but the suits, as a Canadian citizen, the suit will be brought back in Canada. They're not going to suit you in a court, in a court that has no jurisdiction over you. New screen, please. Okay, so again, I'm just going to go through a little more of the specifics of the line for line coverage. As we said, the program is general liability, and this is really the aspects of a pretty standard general liability policy. The base policy gives you $2 million, but you can buy up to $5 million. It's not uncommon. $5 million is being bought up these days, mainly because of contractual obligations. If you're signing contracts to enter facilities, government facilities, $5 million is not very uncommon these days. The policy covers has a $1,000 deductible for all claims. And again, these are throw-in coverages. The $2 million is completed operations. That's important because without the completed operations, you effectively are just getting coverage for slip and fall. You have coverage for injury to participant here. So there can't be a conversation where there's no coverage because they're deemed an insured. So if participants injure each other, coverage can respond. If your participant is injured and sues, then coverage will respond. Non-owned auto, again, very typical standard extension of a general liability policy. This covers if you're driving your car that's personally not owned by the coaching side of you, and there's a claim, there can be coverage that you can drop down to get. Not assuming your primary auto policy doesn't decline, but this just gives you a little bit more excess. $500,000 tenants legal liability, again, throw-in coverage. This covers this is coverage with respect to if you have signed leases and you are legally obligated for premises. This coverage is $500,000 for damages to leased premises. Employee liability. This, again, it's contingent excess to anything workers' comp wouldn't cover. If you had an employee who fell off their, chair, then they sued you for giving them a bad chair. That's sort of what it is. We have blanket additional insured included. So you sign a contract to access a facility. We have blanket additional insured on this policy. Everyone that says I need to be added to your policy as an additional insured, then that is an automatic. Incidental medical malpractice. Effectively, what this is just first aid. If you err in the application of first aid, and there's a medical incident, then coverage would respond. Otherwise, there would be no coverage for medical related losses. Again, $1 million of professional liability, and what also comes with the base policy is that blanket sport accident medical benefit policy, which we'll get in a little more detail. Next slide. Okay, so the medical, this is, I'm highlighting the benefit. There's two sections to the sport accident. It will pay out-of-pocket medical costs, including everything from the ambulance day one to here are the indemnifications on the medical benefit. What is also part of the print, at the bottom, you have a blanket sport accident with a $50,000 principal sum. Well, I'm not going to get into that, but everything from a death benefit to a loss of use of an eyesight, limb, you not only will get access to the medical reimbursement, but you will have a potentially qualified, depending on the injury sustained, for the lump sum payment. That it's absolutely important that if you do a lot of traveling for your sport, that you still buy travel medical. The medical portion of this that you're seeing on these lists does not respond overseas. You will get access to the lump sum coverages based on an injury overseas, but you will not get your a fracture indemnity. You will not get the ambulance cost paid for. So any traveling, including your participants, must carry, and it's always the case, it must purchase a travel medical policy and make sure that there is no verbiage and wording for limitations based on the activities you are doing while traveling. Next slide. Okay, so again, we've gone into what the base policy you get no matter what. There is coverage, and I've addressed some of those before. Depending on the sport, you might have some property equipment issues. If you are dealing with minors, then you really want to have abuse liability considered. Abuse is not sexual or physical, okay? Any good abuse liability policy, including what we can offer to the program, is not just physical or sexual, it's mental anguish. And that's where we're seeing a lot more abuse claims. And so it's important that we will mention it in the process if you reach out to us. Anyway, that's it. And at the bottom of this, this seminar is good timing. We're at February 5th. In less than a month, the program renews. And so we effectively, you can join throughout the year, and there's never a true prorated. Depending on where you join, we can, for example, I think if you join anywhere in the last 6 months, you're guaranteed, you're mandatory to pay half the premium. We get a lot of coaches call us, and they want from now till for a month, and we can't give you the 30 days prorated coverage, and we will only really give you a short-term policy with the intent that you're going to renew for the next year, because we were finding we were getting, and I'm not calling out hockey, but someone would call us and say, okay, I just want a month of coverage, prorate it, and then they wouldn't renew it. And that's really not the intent here. These premiums have been negotiated, that everyone's seasonal, right? But that's the price to pay. Okay, next slide. Unfortunately, and we're trying to address this as the market gets a little more accommodating, insurance-wise risk, but we certainly don't can't insure everything under the moon. While we can insure lacrosse and hockey, if it involves contact, unfortunately, it's a no-go. And unfortunately, if you're on this and you're involved in some of these, please reach out to us. We do have some solutions, but it's not always available. It's not available under this program. New slide. This is the pricing. Obviously, the 3 tiers: coach, developer, standard coach, and registered professional coach. Depending on the sport, there's classifications A, B, and C, and they just really have to do with the inherent risk of the sport. And so the program has $2 million in CGL, we can increase it to $5 million. It's a $200 increase. And property and abuse liability, those pricing are individually specific and dependent on what they're rated accordingly. Next slide. Okay, so one of those optional coverages I feel is getting a little more attention, but it definitely hasn't gotten a lot of attention, and that's if you need legal advice. If you don't like your neighbor, right? Everything we've spoken about so far is third party coming after you, and you want to be defended by your general liability, professional liability, abuse liability. Well, this is if you have, you need your own legal representation, and not even just if there's an illegal event. If you just want to call a lawyer and ask them, you have access to the legal expense add-on. Next slide. And we've partnered with ERIG. They're the world leader in this legal expense coverage. And they're a German-based company, but they are the leader, and they are also the leader in Canada. Next slide. So, I mean, again, the policy or the add-on, should it be purchased, is legal insurance should you need it. You have access to a qualified lawyer, but there's also on the left side legal assistance. Again, if you just had one conversation, one call, one question that you're afraid to call a lawyer because you don't want to be billed an hourly, well, that's paid for by this policy. You have access to 24/7 legal assist. You can call them, talk to them if there's an HR issue, an identity theft issue. You have access to ask. There's no stupid question. You'll get a call back within 24 hours. The lawyer might say you have a legal issue here that could then trigger the coverage. Next slide. And to help you understand, again, I've tried to pick out some specific claims. This one claim, the association executive director saved $41,000 in legal bills. I mean, for a couple $100 premium, you can see that the value here. But she received a demand letter from an former employee alleging a wrongful dismissal and human rights complaint, seeking $80,000 in damages, and this coverage can be tailored to to defend, to help you through the process. Next slide. Interesting. This is a head coach. Certainly not a whole heck of savings, but $480 in legal fees were saved to fight a speeding ticket on his way to coach. So again, I mean, that's well more than, the premium is well under half of that. And just to show you what access to some legal assist you have under this add-on. So, please don't ignore it. Next slide. Yeah, and again, I'm just giving you some, the base policy has a legal assist service. So, you can have, document review, help them with drafting of letters, just calling, unlimited HR assist, I think is very key. How do you, navigate an employment issue? And, employment disputes, legal defense, bodily injury. So on the general liability, if you're alleged to have injured somebody, that's what the coverage. Well, what happens if you're injured and you want to press action against another general liability? Well, that's where this is going to step in. Property protection disputes. So tax protection and contract disputes and debt recovery. You can, if there's a contract dispute or someone's not paying, this will go after that. So, it's a very, very, very good policy. It shouldn't be overlooked. Next screen. Oh, I guess that got to the end, quicker than I thought. I guess on time, though, actually. And I know some questions were already asked, but feel free to, ask away. I'm here for a bit. Any questions? Holly or Natalie, are there? Do you see any hands up? Oh,
Someone's
can
asking
you-
if you can go back to the legal slide.
yeah. Which slide? Go back. Claims or the coverages?
Just giving a moment for the participant.
This one.
Okay, this one. Go ahead. I mean, I like to explain this policy. If you have one reason to call a lawyer through the year, this is worth it. It will pay the one question. Now, if it comes out that, you have a legal situation, that conversation will address that, and then coverage may trigger in. So just to have the question, to ask the question to a lawyer, you have access to that. And then if there is, you know, an insurable event, then you'll have legal representation arranged.
So my question on this slide was, it says for BC sports associations and your members,
Oh, okay. Where, my bad. Where do you see that?
right underneath the title.
Okay, I just didn't probably edit it, but that's my bad. That's an edit issue. That can be, that's for every coach here, not just BC associations.
All provinces, okay.
All provinces, yeah. Sorry about that. Any other questions? Again, you can reach out to my office, my Natalie, me, the contacts will go to any one of us. There's no small, not important question. Whether you want to discuss, you know, enrolling or, you know, other, you know, insurance matters, just ask us anytime. It doesn't have to be on this webinar.
Just give one more moment in case there's a question. While we wait, Sean, I just wanted to say thank you on behalf of the CAC and all the participants here today, for sharing your time and expertise with us. It was very much appreciated. For everyone on the call, their PD points will be awarded by the end of this week, and the recording will be sent as well. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Lots of thank yous in the chat.
Thank you. Thank you. Reach out anytime, everyone. Happy to talk.